once your website is represented by a knowledge graph. In that way, you can make sure that also the search engines can understand that each page is talking about a concept and how is related to the other concepts, to the other web pages of your website.
Before we jump into today's episode, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode, Ahrefs. Ahrefs provides you with an all-in-one SEO toolset that does everything from rank tracking to backlink analysis, keyword research, and technical audits. The best part, you can now use Ahrefs Webmaster Tools for free to identify and prioritize optimization opportunities for your website, see all the keywords that your web pages are ranking for, take a close look at the websites that link back to and refer you in their content, and analyze other websites to find out what drives their rankings. Visit ahrefs.com/AWT and sign up for free. And now, back to today's episode. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the SaaS SEO Show. I'm your host, George Hasiotis, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Beatrice Gamba. Beatrice is a digital project management and SEO strategist at WordLift. She joined WordLift's team in Rome in 2016 after a 3-year experience in Berlin, where she worked for a big e-commerce company. Beatrice has over 6 years of experience in digital companies. Her job is to make people and businesses stand out with detail-oriented management and the most effective AI-driven strategies. In her spare time, she collects and spins old 70s records and rides her bike. Beatrice, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before we get started with the very interesting things that I'd like to discuss with you today, could you please share a couple of things about you and your journey and what has brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's been, I didn't actually look for it as I graduated in economics. So during this degree path, I never actually crossed anything about computers or anything related to that. The thing is that I had these lessons with this professor that taught cultural economics, and in some way it led to the long tail theory, which was very cool back then. And the book had been out in the USA for a while, but in Italy for not that much time. So I really liked it, and I focused on that. So I decided to write my thesis on the long tail theory and how it applied to websites. So I analyzed the Amazon.com UX and stuff like that, and then I left for Berlin, where I found a job at Zalando, and I worked there for a couple of years. And then when I came back to Rome, I started working at WordLift, and it's been 6 years now that I'm here.
Okay. By the way, I've never heard of this book, The Long Tail Theory, but I guess that after we finish with this episode, I will, just search for it on Amazon. Now, today you are at WordLift for some years now, actually. Could you please let us know what WordLift, the product is, and who gets the most value of the product?
Yeah, so basically what we do here is well, sell. I don't like this verb, but this is actually what we do. We sell this innovative SEO tool that basically adds data, metadata to the pages of websites. So in other words, it sort of translates your web pages into the same language that is spoken by Google or any other search engine. So basically, it looks like some sort of semantic text editor, but then it actually suggests content and entities that are relevant to your audience. So this is all done with artificial intelligence, so that this is how WordLift can suggest content to content editors and content creators.
Okay, okay. That sounds very interesting. And I would like us to start, uncovering all these things that are connected, obviously, to WordLift's capabilities, and also to your expertise. And I guess that I would like to start with a very basic question. What, for people who may not know, what is a knowledge graph?
Yeah, so basically, a knowledge graph is a concrete, graph suggests that it's something that you can see. So we will say that represents like a network that is composed by real world entities, such as objects, events, concepts. And then in this representation, it also illustrates the relationships between these entities. So it's sort of a dynamic infrastructure, in our case, behind content, behind website contents, that allows it to be also eligible for search engine, and then of course voice assistants, for search engines. So basically, once your website is represented by a knowledge graph, in that way you can make sure that also the search engines can understand that each page is talking about a concept, and how is related to the other concepts, to the other web pages of your website. So it's sort of a semantic backbone of your website, we can say.
Okay. Follow-up question here would be, I guess, as I understand it, that a knowledge graph is something dynamic, yes, and not static, meaning that like the entities, the interpretations, and how we perceive those entities in the context of a knowledge graph can change over time. For example, you may think of Twitter 6 months ago, and you think of Twitter as a social media platform, a place where people share ideas, express opinions, and so on and so forth. But if you think about Twitter today, you cannot stop, or you cannot prevent about thinking of Elon Musk as well. So this change, I assume that is something that will be applied in, for example, Google's knowledge graph. Yes.
Yeah, in fact, it can also be looked at in defining it sort of a dynamic knowledge base. We also, and also it has many applications. For example, for one of our Fortune 500 clients, we started developing a knowledge graph-based chatbot, which is a chatbot that like exploits all the properties of the knowledge graph. The main one in this case being that the knowledge graph as a knowledge base is dynamic. So and actually it represents the content of your website, so that you don't have to nourish and train a natural language NLP based knowledge base that has to be trained every now and then, taking a lot of time. Whereas the knowledge graph is totally dynamic, and you can actually edit, and then all the edit that you do are then represented also in the front end. So in this case, for this application, that a knowledge graph based chatbot can be the main, the main driver is the fact that it's dynamic and totally editable, and it doesn't need to be trained. Only, well, of course, in the beginning, when you actually start doing creating a knowledge graph, then of course the work that has to be behind all that is that you have to think of a content strategy, because knowledge graphs have a lot to do with the structure of your content. But this is another theme. Sorry, I am.
Yeah, I would like to to take a step back, and all this is obviously very, very interesting. So my understanding is that Google has its own knowledge graph for some years now, and I assume that it's evolving and it becomes better and understanding, all these interconnected objects and making the associations and so on and so forth. But can one website, have its own knowledge graph as well? And if yes, what's the beginning of that process? Is it just crawling the content, or feeding a crawler with additional content that is important to us, for example, support articles that we may have, and so on and so forth? So how would we go about creating our own knowledge graph, for example, for the website of a SaaS company?
Yeah, so this is basically exactly what we do here at WordLift. We create knowledge graphs. You can actually do that with WordLift plugin. Then the work, as I was saying before, that is behind the creation of a knowledge graph is that you must have all your basics straight. That means that you must know what your objectives are. You must know very well your audience. That is very important in order to create meaningful content that is relevant for your audience. Because this is going to drive, traffic to your website. And as well, you must know very well your competitors. So you must know, for example, you can start by running a keyword analysis for search intents that are important for you, and then you must see like the top 5 of this for each query, and who has the better content about that. And so this is how you can start also the creation of a knowledge graph, because then you sort of extract the entities, the most important entities for your content from these search intents. We have also developed a Google add-on that does just that, with an integration with Google Sheets.
Okay, we will definitely talk about that. What I find difficult to understand when it comes to knowledge graphs is, okay, I can understand, like, the first step would be to try to identify or define, let's say, entities. Okay, that's great. Let's say that we get this out of the way. But how do you go about making the associations between these entities? Like, this entity is connected to that entity, and this is the connection between them. And how do you go about that? Like, is it a manual process, or is it something entirely different?
So basically, with WordLift, that is quite easy to do, because it runs on the back end of your website, regardless of the CMS you might use. And so we know that an entity has an entity type. So it can be an FAQ, it can be an article, it can be a thing or a person or an event. Each of these entity types has its, let's imagine them as fields to be filled in order for the information to be complete. So let's take, I don't know, an example. you have a person, so then you have the entity of a person, so then you start writing your description of this person, and then the entity type person has some requirements, which can be, the birth date, where this person was born, if he has a degree, if he has some other connections to other people or other things in the knowledge graph, if he's the founder of some company. And then once you start filling in all this information, then you will have a sort of knowledge graph. You will have a cluster behind this person, because then the knowledge graph will have Elon Musk person, entity person, and then is founder of is founder of Tesla, and then you include Tesla in your information, and then you have the entity Tesla that you can fill in with other details, so that you have a bigger cluster. So this is how we work on that.
And this is something that all these things are that you just described. Can you do them inside WordLift? Like you can do them. And my question would be like, okay, you can do them, but would you say that it's something that only technical people can grasp and do, or someone who has some guidance, maybe from your support, can do as well?
Actually, it's pretty easy to do that with WordLift. Before I define the process, I use the verb filling in, because this is actually what you do with WordLift. You actually you select the entity type, and then the page adapts and starts showing up the fields that you have to fill in with all the requirements for that specific entity type. So then once you start maybe typing Tesla in the founder section, and then WordLift will create automatically the entity Tesla, and then you can start working on that entity as well. And so it sort of adds up while you do that. Things will come to your mind, and then the AI will suggest other connections. So that is pretty easy. It just requires some content structure, some basics of the strategy that you have in mind.
But would you say, and strategies, what I wanted to ask right after that, but would you say that like, let's say that we have a very big company, SaaS company, let's say that, we have Salesforce, and we want to build a knowledge graph for Salesforce. Would you say that it's something that it's a task that you will have to have a person who is dedicated on just maintaining the knowledge graph and making sure that the information is accurate and up to date and so on? Or, it's something that goes on autopilot, just you set it up and then it just, develop, like it can develop by itself?
No, it requires some maintenance. I mean, but just as your website does, I think that good content is updated content, and so the knowledge graph, it sort of follows this sort of role, let's say. So it definitely, you might need maybe not a dedicated person. Usually we work with other company SEOs or content managers. So usually they are our spokespersons of our clients, and we usually take care of updating the knowledge graph, but then it depends on which on the grade of integration that you wish to have with us,
Okay,
but
okay.
it's also pretty easy. I mean, if you have a blog, it's also pretty easy to just do that by yourself. I mean, once you update a web page, then it's easy to update the other fields that are behind the page.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess then my next question would be, on a very practical level, I can understand the value of it, from an SEO standpoint. But you mentioned something previously, and I want to discuss it a bit. You mentioned that you managed to create a knowledge graph that, and then like you have a chatbot on top of that pulls answers right from the knowledge graph and serves these answers to, I don't know, is it support or is it for prospects on the website?
No, it's a chatbot for an informational website. So it was built to answer questions about some topics rather than support.
Okay, that's very interesting. Could we please elaborate a bit on that like project? Because even though I think that chatbots are not, at some point, I guess a few years ago, there used to be, everyone was talking about chatbots. Nowadays, not so much, but knowledge graph and chatbots in the same sentence, things things get interesting. And so I would like to dive a bit deeper into that and try to understand like what was the thought process behind it? How did you map certain entities to, I don't know, certain questions and outcomes of these questions? I would like to know a bit more, if you could share a few things more about the chatbot that you built.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we did it, as I said, for one of our biggest clients, and we had been working with them for 1 year. So we, in terms of the creation of the knowledge graph for them, uh, so we just came up with a way to serve. They wanted a chatbot, so we said, well, let's reuse what we have and apply it as a knowledge base for the chatbot that they want. I mean, in the end, chatbot answers questions basically. So what better way to answer questions through a knowledge base that is already interconnected. So it might as well suggest the user the questions. So a knowledge graph serves this very well. But basically, this was also a way, not speaking about the technicalities of that, but actually how the knowledge graph serves the chatbot and therefore the user. It works just like an SEO strategy, because then you also, when creating a chatbot, you must have your personas, your ideal audience, your ideal questions. And so also in this case, you need a strategy behind that very much overlaps with the one on your website. So this is also why a knowledge graph that it contains already the your website information in it is perfect use application for a chatbot.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think that it's one of the most interesting applications I've, if not, the most interesting application I've ever heard of, a knowledge graph.
Yeah, because it's also very useful for, it spares time when you have to train a model for a chatbot with NLP. It takes a lot of time. Whereas as I said before, the knowledge graph is dynamic and easily editable. So
Okay,
that is
yeah,
also another.
that makes sense, and it's very, very interesting. Now, one of the buzzwords of the SEO industry nowadays is semantic SEO. Another one is topical authority, I guess. And now there will be multi-search, and who knows what else. But let's stick with semantic SEO and discuss it for a minute. What, in your opinion, are the elements of a semantic SEO strategy?
So basically, you have to. I mean, the easiest answer will be you have to forget about keywords and start thinking in terms of entities. But that is also quite, generic answer. So also in this case, you actually have to think of the user first, because websites are for users. So we also have to translate search intents into entities. And of course, this is also where the topical authority comes into the game, because we want to expand the search intents, expand the queries, and then scrape the entities behind those queries. This is how we start usually a semantic SEO strategy. Then, as I said before, it very much applies also to how a knowledge graph is created, because usually you start with the main topics, the main topics that drive your business goals. And then from there, you start creating more and more related entities. And so you actually are doing some keyword clustering. You are clustering your intents to make sure you cover all your most important topics. So everything, it's like just like a knowledge graph, it's interconnected. Then also an SEO strategy, it is interconnected.
SEO nowadays becomes, increasingly more complex. Like in the past, it used to be just optimize some title tags, add some keywords inside the content, just make sure that your meta description is enticing, and so on and so forth. And these and a couple of other things, link building obviously, and that was it. But nowadays I have the feeling that things become more and more complex. And I also think that, like, companies that are specialized in like very specific aspects and areas of SEO can win in the long term. Now, connected to that, as semantic SEO, I would like to discuss semantic writing a bit. And I would like to hear your thoughts on semantic writing and how companies, SaaS companies, can make sure that their content is optimized for, semantic SEO.
Yeah, this sort of follows the previous question, because the goal of semantic writing is to answer questions that your ideal audience have about your main topics. So when semantic writing, you have to take into consideration the tone of voice, just like traditional content, digital content writing. And then but you have some sort of advantages once you have a knowledge graph, because you already have your own vocabulary. Because then ideally, when you have a knowledge graph, you have all these entities inside the knowledge graph and all that are interconnected, and then you start actually building your own vocabulary. And then with that vocabulary, you want to write also content that adapts to it, so this is something that, for example, WordLift does very well, because once you start writing your content in either blog posts or pages, then you have a sidebar that with content suggestions that are actually entities, and it gives you like hints of what you might want to talk about that is also relevant to the content that you're actually writing. So this is how also AI can help you writing better content and more relevant content for your user. So this is, I think, that what differs from traditional content writing is that you have a context that, I mean, is the advantage that you have, is that actually knowledge graph and semantic writing has this context that it's behind the piece of content that you want to write. and that is aided by AI.
Is this context defined or influenced by competitors? Like, what are the competing uh, pages and con pieces or whatever on the search results, or is it something like completely different? Because I know that many tools that help with content optimization and semantic writing, for that matter, they take into account what the competitors are doing and what phrases and terms the competitors are using in order to give you recommendations. How does that work technology wise?
Yeah, it usually talks about your competitors, because everything that we know is based on previous experience. So let's say that here competitors, when you are writing new content, you are the new content. So what is suggested is usually based on what already exists. So I would look at that in this way. And then, of course, you can still drive your audience. You can still stimulate your audience by creating new content that contains the topics that you want to write about. I mean, there's no point, I think, to create any duplicated content. You can still write your own content just by maybe writing and using the entities that are related to what you want to talk about, but you must not only answer the same questions that your competitors are doing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and it's also, it's not only about closing the information gap and making sure that you have included everything inside the page information wise compared to every other page that's out there, but also I've seen that adding something more on top of that can definitely have a positive impact, something that other pages don't have, answering questions that are not yet in people's minds, but that these are the next questions that they will have in their minds after coming to that page. Now, we are running out of time, and I have one last question for you before we start wrapping things up, which is almost 6 months ago, you published an article on WordLift's blog on an experiment you ran on keyword clustering using embeddings. Can you please explain what keyword clustering is for people who don't know? And I would like us to focus a bit on embeddings. Where do embeddings come into play when it comes to keyword clustering?
All right, so we experimented with embeddings and keyword clustering. So the queries clustering, entities clustering is important, let's say, strategic in this case to determine what intent we can target with a given web page. So also what intents should be part of a content hub. Let's say a content hub can be the concrete interpretation of a keyword cluster. And then keyword clustering also drives the decisions of how informational and transactional intents can be split between blog pages, categories, product pages. We can actually by using embeddings add a relevant context behind this content. I don't know if it's a little bit difficult to explain. So what an embedding is basically a relation that contains information about another relation. So information about the nearest intent behind it. So it's also what a knowledge graph is basically, because
Would
it
you say
contains.
would you say that it's, sorry for interrupting you, but would you say that it's like adding a label on an entity, that, or several labels, that this entity has this label and that label and this one and so on and so forth? Is it, is it what it is?
Yeah, yeah, that is what it is. And also by giving labels, might sound, sort of fake, but we can describe it as a synthetic query, a query that wasn't there before, but now it is, and it has that name. And this sort of connects to what we were saying before, uh, about new, about having in mind and predicting what your user might want to know next. So when you have, um, you must think of keyword clustering as a graph, a big graph with entities that are interconnected, and you must think of that connection as an sort of embedding, because that is a relation that contains information about another relation. So that is very, once it comes into play, it's very important um, for a semantic SEO strategy, because then you know what's behind that information that is talking about that topic that you originally had in mind. Then it really expands.
Okay, that makes sense. A few weeks ago, you released an SEO add-on for Google Sheets. Can you please explain what the add-on does and how people can use it?
Yeah, so the add-on so basically works with Google Sheets, and basically it lets you create a knowledge graph with just this integration. So basically, for you have to select a few queries for which of um, for which one you can analyze the first 5 results and see the details about these keywords, and of course their rankings and the metrics. So after this SERP analysis, you can see the entities that WordLift extracted and guessed that you might want to have inside your knowledge graph. So, and then of course it also contains the CMS, which are the links to Wikidata and Wikipedia, that are most important um, when creating an entity. So then the row, the entity row contains all this information, and then you can actually select the entities that you want and send them over to your knowledge graph, regardless of your CMS. So whichever CMS you have, you can add this WordLift integration, and you can start creating your own knowledge graph just by starting from a keyword analysis, just like we were saying at the beginning of our talk.
Okay, we will use the add-on and we will let you know our feedback after we use it. Last question that I have for you would be, where can people find out more about WordLift and you, and come in touch if they like to?
Yeah, so basically we have our own website, which is wordlift.io. And then from there you can start chatting with us. You can book a demo, or just sending over your inquiries about WordLift. We will be happy to answer all your question, and also you can reach out to me at Beatrice at wordlift.io for any further questions about what we talked about today.
That's great. Beatrice, thank you very much. This was all very insightful, and I'm sure that the audience will find it very insightful as well. Thank you very much. And who knows, looking forward to the next one where we will discuss even more, interesting things about semantic SEO, knowledge graphs, and who knows what else at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Before you go, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the sponsor for this episode, Ahrefs. Ahrefs provides you with an all-in-one SEO toolset that does everything from rank tracking to backlink analysis, keyword research, and technical audits. The best part, you can now use Ahrefs Webmaster Tools for free to identify and prioritize optimization opportunities for your website, see all the keywords that your web pages are ranking for, take a close look at the websites that link back to and refer you in their content, and analyze other websites to find out what drives their rankings. Visit ahrefs.com/AWT and sign up for free.